Exploring artificial intelligence, advanced technologies to address climate change. This is a pre-recorded version. You can find the full agenda of the conference on eces2022.neu.edu.tr. First of all, I would like to thank the Near East University for inviting me to this prestigious conference, and more particularly to Mr. Bollary and the president of the conference, Professor Dr. Gochekus. I take this opportunity to wish everybody celebrating happy holidays, excellent health, and happiness. My name is Yael Rozencwajg, and I am the founder and CEO of Innovo Technologies and the Road to Sustainability. I'm also the chair of the IEEE Standards AIS Wellbeing Initiative and board advisor at Growing Startups. A case study will follow this keynote presented by Mr. Yangbo, a member of the Road to Sustainability and Managing Partner Investments at Innovo, and then a QA between us. The Road to Sustainability is an inclusive network focused on enhancing sustainable communities. You can find us on all social channels and theroadtosustainability.com. Innovo Lab is a purpose-driven platform that leverages artificial intelligence to provide organizations with the tools to integrate sustainable imperatives while generating actionable insights. You can find us on innovolab.com. Greenhouse gas emissions must be reduced by nearly half by 2030 and then to zero by mid-century to avoid the worst effects of the climate change. Hundreds of organizations and countries have joined the pledge: Apple 2030, Amazon 2040, the US 2050, and China 2060. Yes, but many net zero commitments are either limited in scope or to a goal that the company has yet to figure out how to achieve. Hope is not a strategy, transparency won't solve the problem, and most roadmaps fail. We don't know how much is achievable today versus what require different technologies. We need to understand the current state of climate change clearly. The near future may be divided into two distinct phases. Tighter monetary policy, high inflation, and slowing growth will continue into 2023, necessitating careful investment positioning. However, the good news is once real interest rates peak, the economic cycle will shift, creating opportunities to increase risk asset allocations. With the Russia-Ukraine war continuing and economic uncertainty looming, organizations must be prepared for increased threats. Yet, the ongoing crisis presents opportunities. More than ever, it's time to look for innovative solutions, alternative energy sources, and different supply forms. Three perspectives to slow down greenhouse gas emissions for climate-focused goals, strategies and activities, new financial solutions, moderate inflation for more productivity gains, new business opportunities, support new measures to ease the burden of those most affected, new tech systems, emphasize the technological revolution. Incentives are needed to encourage the sustainability transition, but a large part of this transition, the energy, the environmental transition, is inflationary. What is needed next for the world to unleash the state on the climate crisis? Climate adaptation, helping people, animals, and plants to survive despite rising climate volatility. Climate resilience and mitigation. The result will be a more robust world economy. A robust implementation mechanism must back up commitments. Incentives for developing countries to prioritize new protection, nature-based solutions, and credible innovative financing. To reinforce the systems, allocate new models, and channel funds to high-value conservation projects, here is what is needed. Cut emissions, realign science-based targets, control deforestation. More risks, more emerging technologies. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to climate change. Each company's policy will depend on its particular business and should mesh with its overall strategy. The system must include initiatives for every company to mitigate climate-related costs and risks in its value chain. Systemic changes and our ability to adapt to evolution requires us to move the needle forward. Technology plays a critical role in our lives. At the community local level, the main tech barriers to overcome for a more sustainable planet are engagement, awareness, and adoption. At the enterprise organization level, a simple view of the process could be research and development, explore, measure, and manage to reduce negative impact through critical data. Market validation, define the mission mission and the purpose to enhance organizational capabilities. Producing at scale, we want the value to support market demand for responsible economies. What type of technology do we need for what purpose? What climate issue are we addressing? If we use a SWOT model to help improve capital knowledge and our effectiveness, what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats? Strength: bold leadership, specific skills, movement capacity building, and diversity. Weaknesses: lack of legacy systems, no inclusion, and no ethics. Opportunities: carbon zero, energy efficiency, supply chain management. Threats: uncertainty, insecurity, population in need. How climate-driven tech can benefit our businesses by implementing climate-driven solutions at the core of our systems. Financial services, reporting, productivity, growth. Healthcare, software and hardware. Manufacturing, logistic and supply chain. Retail distribution and optimization. Public sector, safety and urbanization. Considering that companies can use critical data, operations, leadership, core values, and progress to address the growing challenges. Knowing that the world population is now at 8 billion people, 25% of the world population is about to face a water crisis. Severe food insecurity at 276 million people. And knowing that 1.6 billion people live in inadequate housing conditions, 100 million people in extreme poverty due to health expenses. The end of the beginning. Learning to live with complexity, artificial intelligence, and ethics. Organizations have made great strides in running complex systems, even big ones, by researching breakdowns and adapting accordingly, yet they have made less progress in running complex systems that defy conventional modeling and put traditional management practices to the test. Leaders must use better tools to predict how these systems will behave, data-driven tools that can help understand numerous elements, constant interactions, and the impact of uncertainty. Complex organizations are much more challenging to handle than simple ones. It is more difficult to predict what will occur because complex legacy systems interact unpredictably. It is harder to make sense of things because complexity may exceed our cognitive capabilities. Machine learning and NLP have the potential to help address the most significant societal challenges of our time, from climate change to caring for an aging society. However, responsible technology adoption is hampered by several impediments, including poor data quality and governance issues, which undermine public confidence in the institutions they rely on. Moreover, complex systems are imbued by data that may be managed in patterned ways, but whose interactions are continually changing. Three properties determine the complexity of data-driven environments: multiplicity, interoperability, diversity. Multiplicity refers to the potential interacting data in the system. In a general sense, interoperability is defined by the ability of two or more systems to exchange data, understand the exchanged data, and use the data meaningfully for the purpose it was intended in a meaningful and secure way. Diversity has to do with the degree of their heterogeneity to prevent biases. Some answers generated by ChatGPT. The accumulation of unsustainable processes in a particular ecosystem may destroy the whole ecosystem. Thank you. Case study presented by Mr. Yangbo, a member of the Road to Sustainability and Managing Partner Investments at Innovo.
Yep, excellent, Dan. So again, thank you very much. And for those of you new to this, Yael and I have been collaborating since late 2020 when the Road to Sustainability series first kicked off. with the focus on presenting a more comprehensive and systemic perspective on sustainability, resilience, and other means of addressing the polycrisis that we're facing today. It's not just climate, but we're also dealing with socioeconomic inequalities, biodiversity loss, agriculture, water, how all of those issues are very interrelated. So, at first, to really give a very high level approach about this is to reframe the climate conversation. While it's very important that we do keep in mind things like temperature rise and effects, climate hazards, and whatnot, those more acute, those more measurable and tangible impacts, what's very important for us is to consider that it's part of a much bigger systemic challenge about transitioning from a once through economy where you effectively accept that there will be waste material, there will be refuse that you're going to dispose of, and then rather treating that as waste, treat that as assets. Say, what opportunity is there? So that's fundamentally what the circular economy is about. And as far as the climate emergency and polycrises are concerned, that means a circular carbon economy. So, for example, right now you have three-quarters of global emissions coming from fossil fuels. Now, what if those emissions can then be converted into something useful? For example, biofertilizer that can then be used to restore soils, so improve soil carbon sequestration, thus boosting crop yields, also helping restore natural vegetation. So potentially the power generation plants, whether coal, oil, and steel, as well as coal, oil, and gas, or heavy industries like steel, aluminium, cement, anything else, glass, you name it, like all of those that are very difficult to decarbonize today because they require just a lot of electricity, but also a lot of process heat. That what if they then become part of the solution by turning what it's emitted into fertilizer? It could also be turned into graphene and hydrogen as well. Graphene for advanced materials. It's like you can call it the silicon of the 21st century, as well as hydrogen for energy storage and carriage. And right now, as we're currently positioned, I'm most active with this group, Innovo Net Zero. We work with large corporates, as well as governments in the public sector to achieve net zero profitably and cost effectively. And what better way to achieve profit net zero than turning what would be a waste stream that either emit or otherwise have to pump deep underground in permanent storage? What if then you use that as valuable raw material that would then go on and address things like potential, like a looming crisis around soil depletion that's going to be arriving by the 2040s, 2050s, given excess use of traditional fertilizer, which depletes the soil. In contrast, as we mentioned earlier, with biofertilizer, with carbon-based fertilizer, actually then enhances the soil quality and conditions. And in particular, the main area of focus is obviously the Mediterranean surrounding areas, given that it has had one of the longest histories of any place in the world of millennia of degradation of human settlements. So now, with the future of a human settlement region, if that then becomes instead of extractive and depletive, it actually becomes regenerative. So you could think of this as an intentional Anthropocene in one way or another, in which what we're now doing is restoring that balance within the carbon cycle, whereas during the industrial era, emissions have far exceeded the amount that can be sequestered from natural habitats and other natural ecosystem sinks. So now, if we start restoring those ecosystems, it's not just about reducing the emissions, because even if we aggressively build out renewables as fast as possible, given what I mentioned earlier about the demands of heavy industry, that's only going to get us halfway to net zero by 2050. So we actually have to enhance the sequestration capacity as well. And what better way to do that than to actually position heavy industry as part of the solution, from one of the most intractable climate problems to one of the most potent climate solutions. So that's really a high level overview of really where we need to be pushing things in the remaining 7 years of this decade of action and delivery. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Yangbo, and thank you for this for providing us with so much perspective. I just want to get back to some points that we've shared earlier, and try to format a bit how can we define the circular carbon economy. I think you've mentioned that several
Exactly.
times over the past few weeks. And what about this?
Yes, so if you're defining a circular economy, the most fundamental principle is that you have designed waste out of the system so that every co-product is used in one way or another. And a case study that recently, again, just thanks to interest from places like India and quite a number of other high growth regions of the world, that I've been using is that, let's say, for those of you who've traveled there, just north of Delhi, there is a large landfill called the Balswa landfill. And you can see it if you're driving on the highway north of Delhi. It's one of the most visible landmarks in that area. So, in terms of a circular economy approach, within a landfill, you have plenty of both organic and inorganic matter that can actually be utilized.
Mm,
So, for one is, let's say if you take those streams out, you have your inorganic matter,
yeah,
which then can be manufactured. And we have the technology available today to manufacture cement and other building materials from that
right.
matter. And then when you're left the organic matter, if you have technologies like gasifiers, like all of those, they're very well established technologies, just need greater deployment. Then you can convert that into things like, if you have pure carbon, well, you have graphene, obviously, but also then from the syngas, the carbon monoxide and hydrogen mix, then you can also make biofertilizer and biochar at the same time, both help with soil sequestration, as well as hydrogen for energy storage and carriage. So that's just one example of what you start with at everything is refuse, and
Mm.
how every component of that refuse stream can actually be, no matter what, no matter how it's configured, it can be turned into a valuable material for heavy industry.
Excellent. And that leads us to the future of asset allocation, because we found out, and I personally mentioned that also over my last reviews. How do we manage the different types of opportunities that occur right now, instead of having them, as you mentioned, as considering the waste management, but much more about opportunity management? um, all this future that is yet to be done, is yet to be defined. How can we at least provide a few highlights?
Well, it's really, you can sum it up by the phrase hidden treasure, essentially. That's what it is. And it can be applied in multiple contexts and
Mm,
connotations here. So we've already went over how a very problematic waste stream, which is CO2 emissions from combustion, how that can be turned into
mm,
something that is restorative, that is regenerative in the form of biochar, biofertilizer, also graphene, hydrogen, all those streams.
Mm.
And let's zoom out a bit. Let's take it a bit more broadly, that it's not just that there have been over much oversight of these potential, it's not waste streams, but these value streams, actually,
Yeah.
that's how we should be referring them, these value streams,
Mm.
not just on the physical, environmental aspect, but also if you go into the area of just the financial system very broadly.
Yeah.
So one of the key case in point is the concept of public wealth. For
Mhm.
those of you who haven't and either haven't read the books Public Wealth of Cities or Public Wealth of Nations, or any of the papers he's co-authored by his gentleman Doug Detter, highly recommended reading.
Yeah, we'll
But
add, I
what's
think, in the chat, we'll add the different resources
yeah,
and links.
definitely, yeah,
Also,
we'll
yeah.
add that in the notes, so for sure. So what basically, in short, is that around the world, what has been happening for so long is that not all, but many governments have been neglecting what is the highest, best use of their real assets, especially
Right.
their real estate. So that's another example of there's a lot of having a lot of opportunity there. So, for
Mm.
example, take the UK as an example, that
Right.
from the 1980s until the global financial crisis for this whole quarter century, the UK sold off over 400 billion pounds worth of its public assets
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
private hands for only pence on the pound. So
That's
that's how much
wow.
poorer the general public, the public in the UK had
Mm.
gotten because they had no idea that those assets were actually worth that much. That, for example, let's say you have land that's owned by a city government or a national or subnational government that is undervalued because it's relatively marginal. It may have been recently used for heavy industry. It may
Right.
have been docks that have been disused because of changes in shipping technology, for
Mm.
example. But because they did not know what is of value, were not aware that this can be redeveloped into things like social housing. It can be used to really make the city center, make the urban core more vibrant, make it more
Indeed.
inclusive, that you can actually bring broader economic value to it.
Absolutely.
They just end up selling off without knowledge of, had they kept it and been able to leverage it, redevelop it, they would have gotten much greater value from it. And one case study here is you have
This
the
is
city of Boston
this
that
is
10 years ago.
precisely the point. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and thank you for mentioning that. I was discussing with one of our common friend the other day about local communities and the value that can be brought by diversity, inclusion, sustainability, and everything that
Yeah,
created
exactly.
resilience
Say the
for
city of
and
Boston, for
yeah,
instance, according to Detter's one of Detter's studies, on their books, they only had in the 2010s 1.5 billion worth of assets.
mm,
Yet, if you were to value the city's real estate holdings at highest best use,
yeah, yeah.
then their asset base would be 55 billion US dollars.
Wow.
So more than a 70-fold, 30-fold increase on what their book value is. So which effectively means that with so many cities, places thinking that they're insolvent, they don't necessarily have to be. It's that they just haven't been realizing they have not quite tapped into this proverbial, people call it gold mine, literally in
Yeah,
terms of
indeed, indeed.
their real asset base.
That leads us directly to, and you mentioned that a bit earlier about fertile soils and everything that's related to the future of agriculture. And yeah, I mean, we can find innovative solutions, and we've mentioned that. And we can speak about values on the go as we start looking at what is going to happen and what is happening currently in India, what is happening currently in Africa with the soils. But the point here, I think everything seems to be pretty pretty combined. We generally, select the topics and we try to separate the different focuses. But what I see is that more and more as we go through, um, as we go forward and through the different COPs, I think there are too many distinction, and we need to find out, the right balance to speak about the different challenges of the topics. So, what would be your take about fertile soils and the future of agriculture, which is related to exactly what you said earlier?
Yeah, and all of that, it has to be treated. It can't be treated in isolation, for sure. Since one of the biggest shortcomings lately of these COPs, so whether the biodiversity COP, the climate COP, any of those, is that they have taken still, despite efforts to be more comprehensive,
Hmm.
their two big shortcomings is number one, a relatively siloed approach to
Yeah,
those matters. That if you're dealing with climate, then of course you have to deal with biodiversity,
yes,
agriculture, all of those that both are affected by climate action and also contribute to climate action at the same time. So
absolutely.
just you can't really think of them as exclusive cause and effect. You have to think of them as a whole system of reinforcing and balancing loops, stocks and flows. That's how you have
Yeah,
to think of these things.
yeah.
And secondly, is the second big shortcoming is, and this was even a sentiment I got in years ago, back in late 2018 at COP24 in Katowice, when I happened to be there on site, that much of a sentiment there was even then, the sentiment was that we know what we need to be doing, but you go first. So what has still been very lacking, and it's something I'm doing personally my utmost to amend through my current efforts, is that there has to be a lot stronger bias, focus, push towards action because everything that we've laid out, what needs to be done, what tools are available, what technology be scaled,
Right.
for years now, the big consulting firms, big financial service providers, they have been writing about these issues, yet very few, if any of them, are actually positioned to act on any of this. So that is a gap that seriously needs to be filled in. And incidentally, just full disclosure, I'm fortunate enough to be working with Power of Team who are actively trying to fill that.
Yeah, that's why we're trying to do. And thank you for mentioning that. I think that to move the needle, we really need, movements from the bottom up, instead of waiting for decision makers to make the first step. But that's also, I think, a problem of education that we pointed out a couple of years ago already when we first discussed, about the road to sustainability. And my last question, what do you think about this COP15, with the biodiversity targets that were defined, um, and adopted yesterday, actually?
Yeah, exactly. So with COP15, what's crucial to realize is that, and this is actually why my impression is that how so many well-meaning people have set themselves up for disappointment because there's this tendency, and I can see this, and I don't blame anyone for this because of the urgency of those matters that we have to only 7 years till the 2030 deadline around the global goals, obviously, and maybe even shorter for climate, hence why it is the most urgent. But there's
Mm.
this tendency to treat things as once and done, try to do as much
Oh
all
yeah.
at once. Whereas a much more effective approach is first to focus on treat this as an ongoing process that
Yes.
there's going to be another COP15 in, say, on biodiversity 16. There will be a COP28 coming up in the year on climate. Of course, the regional convenings as well around task force on nature-based financial disclosures. Like, there are all of these processes ongoing. So treat
Mm.
each of these as steps in a much longer, much more comprehensive process. So you
A
don't set yourselves
collaborative
up for
movement, yeah, absolutely.
disappointment there.
Yeah.
And secondly is really to focus on the fact that it's not necessarily, and more often than not, it's not really the case that you're dealing with a system, you're dealing with issues around the actual policies or regulations or codes or anything, how they're written. It's those are tending to be less problematic. What really is the low hanging fruit here, and at all levels, no matter how low or high up on the decision making hierarchy you're situated,
Right.
is that how can what is existing, how can existing policies, rules, norms, regulations, how can they be interpreted and implemented differently?
The big
Because
question.
that's a big gap we're seeing, is that you don't need to throw out the whole playbook, honestly, that
Mm.
you just have to start with first, this is what's there. What can we start doing differently that just relies on reinterpretations of what's there? Because the truth is, it's much more the case that it's less so that the rules and policies are the hindrance. It's more so just human habits, that
Absolutely.
things that we've been doing for decades
Absolutely.
and we're so accustomed to doing that
Yeah.
often we lose sight of how things can be done differently.
Right. Fantastic. Thank you for this. And pinpointed all these highlights. Really important. Thank you, Yangbo. And I look forward to our next session.
Most definitely.
Thank you.